You finally decide to share something you're excited about. Maybe you've started learning a new skill. Maybe you're thinking about changing jobs. Or maybe you're simply happy because something good happened today. Before you've even finished speaking, someone leans forward. "I wouldn't do it that way." Or they say, "Have you thought about everything that could go wrong?" Or they point out, "Actually, there's a much better approach." The conversation changes almost instantly. What began as sharing becomes defending. Some people seem almost unable to let another person enjoy an idea without improving it, correcting it, or pointing out its weaknesses. I bet you have someone exactly like this in your life, and I know how incredibly frustrating it is. You just wanted to share your joy, and instead, you're stuck defending yourself. But why do they do it? By the end of this video, you'll see that this constant criticism isn't actually about you or your idea. It serves a completely different purpose. Welcome to Mini Mind Hack. We'll explore why correcting others can quietly regulate the corrector's own emotions, why advice sometimes protects the person giving it more than the person receiving it, and why modern life makes this pattern easier to fall into than ever before. Imagine exactly the same conversation happening with two different people. The first listens. They ask what excites you. They become curious before offering an opinion. The second immediately begins evaluating. They point out risks, weaknesses, better alternatives, or mistakes you haven't even had the chance to make. At first glance, it looks like one person simply knows more. But knowledge isn't the biggest difference here. The real difference is psychological. Before criticism becomes communication, it often performs another job entirely. And unless we understand that hidden job, many everyday conversations remain surprisingly frustrating. One of the first psychologists to explore this question was Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychiatrist and psychologist who worked during the early 20th century. Adler believed that feelings of inadequacy are not unusual. Every person experiences them at different points in life. The important question is what we do with those feelings. Some people become curious and keep learning. Others begin searching for ways to feel psychologically taller. Becoming the evaluator is one such strategy. When they correct someone else, even for a brief moment, the relationship subtly changes. They are no longer the one being judged. They become the one doing the judging. That shift can create a small but genuine sense of certainty. This doesn't mean these people consciously think, "I'm going to criticize someone so I can feel better." The process is usually much quieter than that. Imagine you share an ambitious plan with them. Before they've even reflected on it, they feel an almost automatic urge to point out a problem you haven't considered. Only afterward does their mind explain the reaction by saying, "I was only trying to help." That explanation feels convincing because it arrives almost immediately. But emotionally, something important has already happened. By stepping into the role of advisor, they briefly experienced competence, certainty, or usefulness. Their emotional reward came first. Their rational explanation simply caught up afterward. This idea becomes even clearer through the work of Karen Horney, a German psychoanalyst who later continued her career in the United States. Horney devoted much of her work to understanding anxiety and the quiet ways people protect themselves from it. She noticed that when uncertainty becomes uncomfortable, some people don't move toward others with curiosity. They move against them. They become more controlling, more demanding, or more critical. Not because they enjoy conflict, but because directing attention towards someone else's imperfections briefly pulls attention away from their own doubts. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about what they feel insecure about. It is about what you should have done differently. But if criticism really helps regulate uncomfortable emotions, another question appears. Why does it seem to happen most often when something good is happening? Why are people sometimes more eager to point out flaws in your promotion than in your failure? Why does good news so often attract unsolicited advice? The answer leads to another psychological mechanism, one that has less to do with criticism itself and much more to do with comparison. Because in many situations, what triggers the criticism isn't your decision. It's what your decision quietly awakens in the other person's mind. The next piece of the puzzle was described by Leon Festinger, an American social psychologist whose work transformed the way we understand everyday social behavior. In the 1950s, Festinger proposed that people constantly evaluate themselves by comparing themselves with those around them. We rarely notice ourselves doing it because it happens automatically. Someone else's confidence, success, appearance, or happiness quietly becomes information about our own position. Most of the time, these comparisons are harmless, but when they make us feel smaller, the mind immediately begins looking for a way to restore balance. Now think back to the person sharing exciting news. Maybe they've started a business, lost weight, written a book, found a healthier relationship. None of these things directly threaten you, yet they can still create discomfort because they ask an uncomfortable question without saying a word. If they can do this, what does that say about me? That question is rarely conscious, but once it appears, criticism becomes surprisingly useful. If you can find enough flaws in the other person's decision, you no longer have to sit with the uncomfortable comparison. The focus quietly shifts from your own uncertainty to their supposed mistake. This may explain something that seems almost backwards. People often receive more unsolicited advice when things are going well than when everything is falling apart. Failure usually invites compassion. Success invites comparison. Imagine telling a friend you've been promoted. Before they congratulate you, they start talking about stress, longer hours, office politics, or how the company isn't actually that good. Sometimes those concerns are completely reasonable, but notice the timing. The criticism arrives before curiosity, before celebration, before they've even asked how you feel. In that moment, the conversation is no longer about understanding your experience. It has become a way of regulating theirs. Of course, this doesn't mean every criticism comes from insecurity. Sometimes people really do have knowledge that can save us from expensive mistakes. Sometimes difficult feedback is exactly what we need. The difference usually isn't the criticism itself. It's the intention behind it. Genuine guidance begins with understanding. It asks questions. It adapts to the other person's situation. It accepts that the other person may ultimately choose a different path. Emotionally driven criticism struggles to do that. It needs agreement because agreement confirms the emotional relief it was seeking from the beginning. Perhaps the most uncomfortable part of this entire discussion is realizing that all of us do this sometimes. We interrupt because silence feels awkward. We offer advice because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. We point out flaws because they are easier to talk about than our own doubts. None of this makes us bad people. It makes us human. The important moment is learning to notice when we are speaking to genuinely help another person, and when we are quietly trying to calm something inside ourselves. The next time someone immediately starts correcting you, try asking yourself a different question. Instead of thinking, "Why are they trying to change me?" Consider asking, what might they be protecting? Maybe it's their confidence. Maybe it's their need to feel competent. Maybe it's simply the discomfort of comparison. That doesn't mean every criticism should be ignored, or that every critic is secretly insecure. But it reminds us that words often have two audiences, the person listening and the person speaking them. Understanding this changes more than the way we see other people. It changes the way we see ourselves. The urge to criticize is rarely just about finding mistakes. More often, it is an attempt to restore certainty, protect identity, or quiet an uncomfortable feeling that is difficult to name. The more we recognize that process, the less personally we take criticism, and the more carefully we choose our own words before offering advice. Perhaps the most helpful response is not to become less honest, but to become more curious. Thank you for watching this episode. If this video helped you understand a familiar pattern in a new way, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.